Hi, everyone. I am Rabbi Mark Margolius from the Institute for True Spirituality. As always, honored, feeling blessed to be with you for our daily Jewish mindfulness meditation practice. And I am delighted to welcome back my friend, colleague, and teacher, Rabbi Debra Orenstein, who will lead us in practice today.
Thank you so much, Mark. Pleasure to be back with everyone. The title is in honor of this week's Torah portion, B'Shalach, coming to freedom and to justice with the Exodus from Egypt, and also in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. and his upcoming birthday. I'm actually going to begin with about 5 full minutes of recitation, but I really would like you to receive it as part of the meditation today. So for some people, it might be good to look on the screen and see the words. And I've created a few small visuals, like the dark night on this first slide that you see, that can assist you. And if that's a good way for you, that's great. Another way to imbibe this is to just close your eyes and hear it. Whether you're seeing it or hearing it or both, I hope you'll take it in as a spiritual and personal message and blessing for yourself. Before we begin, I just want to give you a little background on this. There is a parable in Luke that talks about a man who goes to his friend's house and knocks on the door at midnight, asking for bread for others. And he refuses to be turned away. And this is the source of King's sermon, and we'll see that it also has deep roots in the Jewish tradition as well. For now, just as Mark was saying before the official start, please make yourself as comfortable as you can. Take some deep breaths and receive this holy blessing. In the past, when we have confronted midnight in the social order, we have turned to science for help. When we were caught in the midnight of dread plagues and diseases, it was science through surgery, sanitation, and the wonder of drugs, and we could add vaccines, that lifted us to the brighter day of physical health, prolonging our lives and making for greater security and physical well-being. But alas, science cannot rescue us this time, because the scientists themselves are caught in the terrible midnight of our age. This midnight in our collective life has brought about midnight in the internal individual. Everywhere there are people who are harrowed by day and haunted by night with paralyzing fears. It is also midnight in the moral order. Midnight is a time when all colors lose their distinctiveness and become merely a dirty shade of gray. In so many instances, moral principles have lost their distinctiveness. Nothing is absolutely right or absolutely wrong for modern people. For most people, right and wrong are merely relative to their likes and dislikes and the customs of their particular community. Think social media. It's all right even to hate, but dress your hate up in the garments of love and make it appear that you are loving when you are actually hating. And so the midnight of moral degradation grows deeper and deeper. But as in the parable, so in our world today, the deep darkness of midnight is interrupted by the sound of a knock. Then there is a deep longing for the bread of love. Everybody wants to love and be loved. Caught in the chains of injustice and the manacles of discrimination, many of us are left feeling that we are things rather than persons, depersonalized cogs in a vast industrial wheel, little more than a number. In America, millions of Negroes starving for the want of bread of freedom have knocked over and over again. How often has the church or the Jewish community left people standing in the frustrating midnight of economic deprivation? In so many instances, religion has aligned itself with the privileged classes and defended the status quo that it found it impossible to answer the knock at midnight. Living through a generation of so many colossal disappointments, with one towering frustration piled on another. So many have lost faith in God, faith in humanity, faith in the future. But if the church or the Jewish community will free itself from the shackles of a deadening status quo and recovering its great historic mission, will proceed to speak and act fearlessly and insistently on the questions of justice and peace, it will enkindle the imagination of humankind. It will fire the souls of people and imbue them with a glowing and ardent love for truth, justice, and peace. People far and near will then see the church and the Jewish community as that great fellowship of love, which provides light and bread for lonely travelers at midnight. Midnight is a confusing hour and one in which it is difficult to be faithful. But the relevancy and power of the church or Jewish community will be measured by its capacity to meet the needs of those who come at midnight. The most inspiring word that the church can say to people at midnight is that no midnight is here to stay. The weary traveler by midnight who's asking for bread is really asking for the dawn. Therefore, we can walk through the night with a sense of being safe and secure. Weeping may tarry for a night, says the psalmist, but joy cometh in the morning. Take a deep breath. That's a lot. It's a lot of beauty. It's a lot of warning to take in. But I want you to, if you've had your eyes closed, to please open as you're able and as you choose to look at the light of dawn behind the words on this page. Through the remainder of our time now and the meditation that I'll lead at the end, we will traverse the distance from midnight to dawn and hopefully to joy. In this extraordinary sermon, with his usual poetry, King does what prophets do. He dreams dreams and sees visions, even as people knock on our doors and interrupt us and demand from us, even as we may feel knocked about by life. And for him, the answer to the knock at midnight is in our external collective, as he calls it. And that is activism, working for justice, for freedom, for peace, what we would call tikkun olam, healing the world. And equally, the answer to the knock at midnight has to include our internal individual lives of faith, practicing meditation and prayer and musar, as Mark was mentioning earlier. And this maps onto the Jewish notion of tikkun atzmi, healing ourselves through personal growth and spiritual practice. And there are many, many examples throughout our literature of the journey that King talked about. I just wanted to share with you Ba'erev Yalim Bechi V'Lavo Gerina, which he translates as weeping may tarry for a day, but joy cometh in the morning, and so many others. There is no separation between these elements of the external collective and the internal individual. Both are always operating. And I wanted to show them both in this source from Song of Songs, which may have inspired the parable that King draws on, where a knock comes at the door late at night. So in this example, we have love poetry. It's understood also in a communal sense of a love story between God and the Jewish people. But here we can also read it as a connection, a relationship that each one of us has to the external collective that King talked about. A beloved, a stranger, a neighbor, a beloved, a stranger, they're all beloveds. comes, knocks, and says, I need help. I need shelter. I need companionship. This is the external collective knocking at our door. And the answer is going to cost you something. Because I've taken off my robe. How can I get dressed again? I've bathed my feet. How can I soil them again? The internal individual voice can be selfish. My inconvenience may not appear to me to be worth your emergency. But my beloved took his hand off the latch and my insides were stirred for him. I have a longing because I do have a connection with the other. My compassion is stirred because I relate. This is my beloved. This is my friend. This is my neighbor and the stranger whom I have been commanded to love as myself. Kampti. So I rise to the occasion. I try to be there for people. I rose to my beloved, for my hands dripped with myrrh and my fingers flowing myrrh over the handles of the bowl. I try to rise, but sometimes my privilege gets in the way. Wealth, myrrh, is making me slow to open when the beloved knocks. So in King's word, I preserve the status quo. But then in the text, I opened for my lover had turned and gone. And when I faint when he spoke. I sought him, but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer. Sometimes you could say, I love my neighbors, but you might not open the door in the middle of the night, or you might not open in time to help. Now, all of this is talking about the other from an external collective perspective, but we can also see it from the personal perspective, from the internal individual. We are the young woman who is both awake and asleep. We toggle between the two. We are the lover who is knocking. We are incited and aroused and opening, and we are in danger of not opening in time. We are having a nightmare that we may fail to connect, but it's still possible to wake up in time and to live our dreams. As in the parable, so in the world today, the deep darkness of midnight is interrupted by the sound of a knock. And we can look at this too in the external communal sense, that people are in need. They're knocking on our doors. It's our responsibility to help them. There are economic justice issues and healthcare inequities and voting rights problems and countless issues to address. But also, we are among the people who have a need for justice and freedom and support and love. That's internal and personal to us. We're also knocking. And even more personal on the soul level, we are showing up at midnight to knock on the walls that we've erected around our own hearts. And we seek to open the gates to our souls. That's why we have gathered. Further, just to reinforce this beautiful quote by King, the relevancy and the power of the church or the Jewish community will be measured by its capacity to meet the needs of those who come at midnight. In other words, religion is only as important as the degree to which it can address what keeps you up at night. So we have to put this into action. And I'm sure you remember the great words of Abraham Joshua Heschel after he walked with Dr. King. For many of us, the march from Selma to Montgomery was about protest and prayer. Legs are not lips, and walking is not kneeling. And yet our legs uttered songs. Even without words, our march was worship. I felt my legs were praying. And I came across this quote from Frederick Douglass that may have inspired Heschel. I prayed for 20 years, but received no answer until I prayed with my legs. So this external collective is vital. But there is no divide for King or for Douglass or for Heschel between prayer and protest. internal personal spirituality is expressed and achieved and fulfilled with collective external movement. We pray with our legs. At the same time as we're taking care of that movement on the outside, we have to address the need for spaciousness and comfort and hope and positive belief on the inside. And I love the trope of many meditation teachers that it's all grist for the meditation, every distraction, every midnight moment. And that really is also what King is saying, that we can use the midnight of life as even slaves used their slavery to rise. Of course, he talked famously about having a dream. One day, every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain will be made low, and the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. This is our desire when we think about the quote from Isaiah here in the Hebrew too, for the outside world, but it's also the desire for straightening ourselves within, to find balance and to not be in the peaks and the valleys of reactivity. It's an inside job and it's an outside job, and it always has to be both. So one way to get help for both the outer and the inner work is to draw on our roots and to draw on the wisdom and the courage and the example of people who came before us. This is what we talk about in the Amida, in our very first blessing. And this is what I want to engage in with you now to, as we meditate, invoke and evoke some of our favorite role models so that we don't have to go it alone. And maybe your role models were included in what I described. Certainly, you may admire Heschel or King or Douglas, but maybe you have other role models that you can look to. I'm sure you do. I want to invite just a few moments of meditation. We're going to invoke their help and their presence. So I invite you to let your gaze soften or close your eyes. Allow your mind to quiet and your body to settle and your breath to slow. And you may notice as you take some deeper, slower breaths that you start to feel a little more relaxed, a little more settled into your seat, perhaps even a little more peaceful. But with that slowing down and that calm, you can remain alert and curious. Be air, the heart is awake. And I ask you now to think of someone you admire for their activism. Someone who does good in the world. Could be a famous person, going all the way back to our ancestors, Abraham and Sarah. Could be a person you know or know of. Anyone you admire for their work in the world. And name for yourself, if you can, why you chose them. What was it? If you know. See what might bubble up. Beyond any particular deed they have done, What trait or quality do you admire in them? And can you see that trait in yourself? You wouldn't have chosen them if something didn't resonate with you. Where is that trait, that quality in you? And consider their deeds. Think of something they did or do that you admire. Even in a tiny way, is that something you have enacted or could enact? Or is there something analogous that you have done or could do? How is your being like their being? And how is their doing like your doing? This person has come to bless you in these few moments with their legacy and their being. But more than that, they have arrived because you came knocking at their door. So let them bless you now with what your soul needs. What sustenance do you desire? How can they open for you? Listen and see if you can hear from this figure a personal blessing for you. What would they bless you with? Why have they opened to you at this noonday, midnight hour? And offer them a blessing, because after all, they knocked on your door too. And say your goodbye. You might take their hand or hug them, or imagine giving them a place in your heart or your home. Their immediate presence recedes. Take 2 more deep breaths, and when you're ready, after that, you can gently rub your hands together and open your eyes. Listening to King, it could become overwhelming to consider the psychological midnight, the moral midnight, the physical health midnight. But the door is opening, bit by bit, incrementally. And it's good to remember Rabbi Tarfon's balance, that we are not obligated to finish the task, but neither are we free to desist from it. And I love that the word free is included. Ben Chorin, we are B'nai Chorin, we are free. It is our free choice to rise, to open. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I really appreciated the connection you made between, what you described as tikkun olam and tikkun atzmi about this, and then saying that King as well also made this connection that the same process is at work within us and in our world, and that they are inextricably connected in some way. And in terms of practice, we are, I think, maybe I probably speak for many when I say that, we're so overwhelmed by the magnitude of the social issues that we are in, social, economic, planetary issues we are facing, that I think, again, I'll just speak from my own experience, that there's definitely huge resistance that arises when that, when I bring that into my field of awareness. We're taught to label things pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Unpleasant, 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 on steroids. So the practice that we do, which, some people, I think wrongly, might often think looks like navel gazing and, avoidance, is actually a great opportunity for us to work with that. And I think you highlighted that, right? I just think it would be worthwhile to speak a little bit more about what this meditation practice that we're doing every day, what does it have to do with how we are engaged in meeting and engaging with the manifold problems of our world, let alone our individual lives. And just, I'll say my piece about that is that if only it wakes me up to that resistance, then Dayenu. So like, wow, you really don't want to think about that, And then for me, the Rabbi Tarfon you brought at the end, which says that, what, baby steps, just do something, is very helpful for me when I notice that resistance, when I feel like I can't do it. How can I possibly make an impact here? It's just a little bit, What do you think?
I think there's a lot there. So, so I love, in the world of positive psychology, people will say, how could you be 3% more fill in the blank? How could you be 3% more embracing of those difficult thoughts? Or how could, not the all or nothing thinking that we so typically devolve to, because what the all or nothing thinking leads to you pulling the covers up over your head and refusing to answer the door when the knock comes. Because if you have to do it all, you'll collapse. And that's one reason why I also included the ancestors, because sometimes what you need is a little help, a little guidance, a little sustenance for your own spirit so that you can then reach out to others. In the New Testament reading, there's also a certain amount of holy chutzpah there, because basically in that context, people are being advised, don't take no for an answer. Keep knocking. Keep knocking, and you must keep at it, even if you don't succeed right away, even if you don't see immediate results. The act of knocking, the act of fill in the blank, calling your congressperson, advocating for gun legislation, whatever your fill in the blank is, your activism has an effect in the world, even if you can't point to a result yet. There's a effect that it has on your spirit, and there's an effect that it has on the community.
Right. Yeah. And I think this practice helps us, hopefully, at least for me, it has the aim of helping to develop tolerance for the discomfort, so that I can be with it and then have the space to respond in the way that you're describing.
But I would say one other thing, Mark, because it's such an
Yeah.
important question of like how are these two connected?
Mhm,
Is that I think that the old saw hurting people hurt people.
mhm.
When you don't have the inner peace, it's hard to work on the outer peace. And
Mhm.
we've all met certainly people who do great good in the world who are troubled or unpeaceful, or those examples of the great activist who screams at the secretary in the in the
Yeah.
office. We need to find that right balance where the inner life is supporting the work of the outer life, and the things that you do in the world feed you spiritually instead of just stressing you out.
Mhm. When you invited us to think of, call to mind somebody we admired or was inspirational in that way, actually the person who came to my mind was a colleague of ours, Rabbi Ellen Lippman. And I thought of her because I had an email interaction this morning with her, totally not at all about a social justice issue. It was with a bunch of other colleagues, where she, in such a menschlich way, confronted some people about something that was she experienced as problematic. And she came to my mind because I thought, now there's somebody who is both, very responsive to the issues of the day, and is walking the walk in personal life too, like not yelling at the secretary or the colleague, but in an integrated, holistic way, understands it all as being of one piece. It's helpful, I think, to think about people, who, like, we always, the great heroes that we hear about. Sometimes we hear about how they actually weren't like the greatest colleagues or friends or partners, right? And vice versa. So I really appreciated that opportunity. Heschel is famous for describing prayer as that it should be subversive, in that it should address exactly what you're talking about, that midnight knock, right? It should help us hear the knock and respond to the knock in some way. If you want to comment on that.
Well, I think he's also, it is subversive, and I love that word. But I think Heschel also, in his attitude toward prayer, calls back to his Hasidic lineage that says someone else's physical need is your spiritual mission. So he, in his life, really always connected the two in that way. And I also think, how we relate to prayer is a little fossilized. Prayer is meant to be transformative. And if all we do is sort of check the box of I've recited this or that, I've attended this or that, then it's really not doing its job. This is funny. My grandfather was a rabbi, and his favorite joke was about a Quaker prayer meeting. He said some novice who didn't understand how Quakers pray came in, and everybody just sat down and was quiet. This also addresses something I saw in the chat about what's the value of silence. So there's a lot of value in silence. So they sat in silence until somebody's moved to say something, and the newcomer kind of elbows somebody and says, when does the service begin? And he's answered, as soon as we leave here. That's when the service begins.
That's a good one. The other thing that came up for me when you were referring to the Song of Songs and the beloved knocking, was thinking about how sometimes in practice we put our hands on our chest, over the heart space, might maybe give it a little massage. And often I'm thinking about the high holidays during the Al Chet and the Bidui, the confession, when the tradition is to knock on one's chest, and often that can be experienced or understood as kind of self denigration. But I learned from another colleague of ours, who I imagine got it from Reb Zalman probably, that the knocking, this knocking on our chest like this, we can understand just as that kol dodi dofek, that the beloved knocking on the door. So it's just like this tapping to wake up. And that always stays with me too. I wanted to offer that for people. And also, I really appreciated how you reminded us that we're both knocking and hearing at the same time, right? Or I'm responding and sleeping at the same time.
Right. Well, I don't know if you know this, Mark, but I was privileged for 15 years to co-lead High Holiday services with Reb Zalman. And so I heard him say many times, he used to call it spiritual emotional resuscitation instead of
Yeah.
cardiopulmonary
CPR.
resuscitation.
Yeah.
And also a way in which when we say we're knocking on someone else's door, we're always also knocking on our own hearts. We're also kind of waking ourselves up in some way and
Yeah.
evoking compassion in ourselves and reminding ourselves what's needed.
Thank you so much, Deborah. This was a perfect pre-MLK, pre-Shabbat Shira, pre-Tu B'Shvat, pre-everything. And friends, thank you so much for joining us as always today. Thanks for our teacher for today, Rabbi Debra Orenstein, for that beautiful teaching and practice. Thanks to Adi Stein, as always, for holding our space so beautifully. And thank you as well, of course, to our sponsors, Barry and Marilyn Rosenberg, who sponsored today's practice, in loving memory of their friend, Sandy Block. Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be a blessing.